Okay, so I'm going to call this meeting to order. This is the Assembly Legislative Committee. Today is Wednesday, January 17th, 2024. We are noticed from 12:45 to 1:45 p.m., starting just a few minutes late, but my intent is to for sure wrap up by 1:45, if not sooner. So first, let's start with introductions. We'll go around the room.
Karen Bronga.
Scott Myers.
Anna Brawley.
Felix Rivera.
And I know we'll be shortly joined again by Mr. Cross. And I do not see anybody on the phone, but we'll keep an eye on that, and members are welcome to join. So next order of business, we'll go to unfinished business. We don't have any under there. So we just have our new business items. And then I will note we have our standing updates on the agenda. So any member who would like to bring up a question or, a bill you heard about, whatever it is, that's the intent of that agenda section for later. So first, let's move through our new business. First, welcome everyone. This is the first meeting of the Legislative Committee for 2024 and the first one during session, which started yesterday on Tuesday. So I wanted to point everybody to, there's a handout you have. It's the 2024 session calendar. Sorry? Oh, okay. Okay, thank you. We were just joined by a member of the public on the phone. And I should have said also in the room, we have Assembly Council, we have a member of Legislative Services, and then we have our lobbyist who will be presenting later in the meeting. So back to session calendar. This is just for information, but just to let everyone know, this is directly from the AK Ledge website. So it's their calendar, and you can see some of these are, payroll dates and so on. But relevant to us is you can see the first day of session. Last week, there were 2 deadlines for pre-file releases, which means people filing bills before the start of session. And we've been digging into that. Of course, those all have just been introduced, so there's no update on those. And then all of the current legislation that was in play last year is still active unless it's already been passed. So I'll mostly note that we don't get in the weeds on their schedule, but that the 90th day of session it looks like it's Sunday, April 14th. And then the mandated end of regular session, the 121st day, is Wednesday, May 15th. And so just to note, that's kind of the general schedule. And then, of course, we'll see bill hearings come through. They will move through their budget process. And so that's something that we don't need to necessarily track in detail. That's why we have our contract lobbyists to help us out. But just to note that this is the schedule we're looking at. And so my intent, we'll come back to the meeting schedule, but my intent is to hold regular meetings of this committee for purposes of keeping up if we need to take action, and especially if we need to deliberate on any potential action that we might want to bring to the Assembly. So next, I will move to the briefing with our state lobbyist. And I know there's a presentation, so it's up on the screen and on paper. And so we will look for Wendy to give us a good update of what we can expect for this coming year. Thank you. And then I'll also note we were joined by Member Cross at 12:53.
On green. Okay, good. Good afternoon, everybody. Wendy Chamberlain with Legislative Consultants. For those of you who aren't familiar, our firm has represented the Muni for over 20 years, been through various mayors. And so we're very, very happy to be working for the administration because we had a long history with a lot of your projects. And so we really like that part of it. On the phone is my partner, Heather Brakes. Heather joined my firm about 8 years ago. She does a great job on municipal things. I do the municipality of Anchorage and several other municipal issues because Heather does AML. She's the AML lobbyist. That coordinates real well with us because we get to know anything between Nils, Heather, and I that's going on, so that works out really well for us. So I have Heather on in case I miss something. So basically, we tried to give you a short presentation rather than rambling. And yesterday was the first day of session. We got the 120 days. Yesterday a lot of them were happy. Yesterday they got their first pay raise. So that went into effect yesterday. Sorry to say that, but it's everywhere. And one of the first things on the floor was a chance to veto override the governor's education. It failed on the House floor to come into joint session 2020. So as you can imagine, there was a lot of lobbying on that issue and it did not go. It failed 2020. So there's some work behind the scenes to try and come up with a compromise number of 400 or 500 for the BSA. The Senate has sent a message back and said, absolutely, we won't take that number. We want the full amount or no. So they'll negotiate that out for quite a while. Basically, the governor introduced his operating and capital budget, and I think it's safe to say they're a status quo budget. If you look at the revenues for the year, you'll see that oil is slightly down. So oil's now down to just over 2 million for FY25. There's a bump in the investment income off the POMV. So oil now to this year here is only going to be 33% of our revenue for the state. That is a significant drop from where we were. POMV is making up a large part, but we're drawing on the earnings reserve, and that's the interest that spins off the permanent fund. So I think after all these years of back and forth, unless there's a huge spike in oil prices, a stable long-term spike, or unless there's new oil finds, we're to the stage where we've got to look to other areas for some income coming in. If you go over to the next slide, the governor's operating budget is pretty much status quo. Some of the areas, he doesn't have his energy relief payment that he had before. He doesn't have his supplemental appropriations. And the big difference in his budget, and again, we're facing it again this year here, his permanent fund dividend is a full dividend amount. The cost of that is $2.3 billion. Last year, the PFD was $1,300. That came out to $881 million. So you'll see the difference of $1.4 billion. That gives the latitude there for the difference in 1.4, and the governor's spend is the $940 million draw. So you end up with, if you do the same dividend as last year, which probably realistically will say that happens, if you do the same dividend around 1,300, you end up with about a $600 million surplus after paying for the operating budget and running government. So some flexibility in there, not a lot. Of course, oil prices next in the March forecast could go up, could go down, could go up. But right now, that's what we're looking at for revenue. If you go on to the next slide, you'll see that there's an energy dividend to go out. So last year on a compromise on the budget, there was the Senate and the House could not agree on an amount. The House wanted the higher amount, the Senate did not. So what they agreed on was if oil was higher than $73 a barrel, they would spend the excess, 50% would go into savings and 50% would go to an energy dividend. So right now that energy dividend per person would be another $175 on top of whatever the dividend is. And we can say the dividend will probably be anywhere from $1,000 to $1,700, $1,800, depending on what prices are. So that's kind of the financial picture of what we're looking at. Probably won't be any new taxes this year because it's an election year. I doubt, the governor had floated a sales tax. There's different taxes out there, but at this stage here, I don't see any really appetite to take on taxes in an election year. So, and nothing is right in place to move. So let's go to legislation because that's an interesting one. Yesterday, Representative McCabe introduced House Bill 255. It mirrors the bill that Senate Finance introduced at the end of last session. The only difference is that Senate Bill 155 establishes a Port of Alaska Authority, and the wording is the same except for the word South Central Alaska Authority. So that's Matsu, and what that one does is said Anchorage will put all of its assets in, South Central will put its 3 assets that it has in, the things that it has, its land and that. So it's an attempt to try and get a port authority. If I look politically at that, I say, where's it going? It's going to the Transportation Committee on both sides. That'll be the first place that it goes. In Senate Finance, we have Senate Transportation, the chairman is Senator Kaufman. That is very good for us, I think. We have Loki Tobin, Senator Wilson, Keel, and Myers on that. But whether it gets scheduled will be up to Senator Kaufman, and he's a big port supporter. On the other side, House Transportation gets it, and the chairman is the sponsor of the bill, Representative McCabe. So I think at this stage here, with the speaker being from the Mat-Su, Representative McCabe, we're probably looking at a possibility of seeing that House bill go over. The big thing is going to be our wonderful Anchorage caucus. I think we're going to have to be very strong when we're down there with the Anchorage caucus, which is you can talk to them about these bills and let them know that right now that would be a real problem for Anchorage. So Anchorage has the numbers in the House. While we don't have the chairmanship, it's really tough to, and as you'll see, the only one we have from Anchorage on there right now, is Craig Johnson in the majority, so on the House. But I think that's an issue that I just bring to your attention because I smiled when I saw Representative McCabe. It's going to continue to come up. It's going to be an issue that's going to continue to come up.
And just to briefly interject as well, and it looks like we do have Mina on the House,
Yes.
but I know she's in the minority. But I know that the chairs of the Enterprise and Utility Oversight Committee have already reached out to the sponsor of Senate Bill 155 to request a presentation. So I expect that that they will be following up on that. So our committee may be tracking it as well, but certainly because it relates to the port. And yeah, I know we're all interested to hear what the proposal is.
Yes.
So thank you.
Front burner issues for the session. So we'll be tracking that one real closely. And if it gets it will get a hearing in the House, I'm sure. But if it starts to move, we'll be very, very involved with that bill. Issues for the session. The next slide's got issues for the session. Big one we're going to have to be dealing with is Cook Inlet gas shortage. The governor is apparently coming out with legislation that my guess is will provide incentives to try and incentivize new production. I don't know that. That would be my guess. We're at the point, NSTAR's down there. I know they've done the presentations to the Assembly, and you've sort of seen all the numbers on that. The choices that we're probably going to have to import. I think Senator Murkowski and the governor and that are very much against importing, so they have to do something to try and incentivize. I think we have Hillcrest, Bluecrest, and one other entity down there. Heather did text it in my cheat sheet, Heather, to try and get new gas to market. But even that will be years away. So I think we've reached a point where we sort of all recognize that, at least for the short term, importing is probably going to be the alternative unless something else happened. Another issue is the Rail Belt Energy Transmission Line funding. The first lot of federal funding came through for $206 million. It does require a state match. And so, you don't see that in the governor's budget. There's a lot of lobbying already taking place on that. Of course, like anything, it's a balancing act. If the rail belt gets $206 million, what does the bush want? And so that's an expensive thing. One of the things brought up was to bond for it, but then who pays the bonds? Does the taxpayer? Are they general fund? Are they revenue off the utilities? That's a big discussion that's going on right now. We're watching that one carefully too. Education funding. Oh my, that is the battle royale in the building. So the governor's made it fairly clear, I think, and I say fairly clear, I think he's told most of the legislature, he wants to put it into the classrooms with into teacher salaries, into things like that. I think there's some wiggle room there that he wants his parental rights bill and several other bills, and so some negotiation was taking place. I did ask last year when I saw him, why did you veto that money? That's a really hard thing to do. And his answer was, I want some things. It doesn't go all the other way. So I think everybody's getting the message. It's going to be give and take. I don't think he totally opposes the $680 million or whatever it is. I think that he wants some of his stuff too. So that'll be the biggest issue there this session, education funding and Cook Inlet. There was some talk about an energy bond bill. I still hear it's being put together by a division of energy, but I don't know that we're going to see that given the financial picture. Senator Stedman, the very strong chairman over in the Senate, is dead against bonding and general obligation bonds. So that'll be tough to get through past him. Election reform. We're dealing with different kinds of election reform. There's probably 6 election reform bills out there. Some of them are already scheduled. And of course, we're dealing with ranked choice and repealing ranked choice voting. I don't really think that that's going to go, but you never know. I'm not on that. I'm not involved in that issue. So, but I know you're going to see election reform. Medicaid, always big. I think we're 60 million. Heather might be able to specify that number, but I know we've got an extra spend of about 60 million for Medicaid, just based on Medicaid match formulas changing and people signing up, more people signing up. So the Medicaid spend is, state match for Medicaid is higher. Housing, homelessness, behavioral health. Huge issue, huge. We actually, just in full disclosure to the Assembly, now represent Alaska Behavioral Health Association. We started representing them this year. They are now becoming the entity for behavioral health to get all of the providers to speak with one voice. It's actually going very well. Next week, we probably have 14 legislators, very key legislators, over for a presentation to try and figure out what can we do for behavioral health and homelessness, rather than coming in and saying, everyone knows we need money, we need money, we need money. That's not something we really need to educate the legislators on. What else can we do? And one of the big things brought up is parity. So I think that will make a huge difference. The parity is not funding parity, but it's if you get referred and you have a substance abuse or a mental health problem, you should have access to services the same as a medical condition patient. You should not have to go through these 3 or 4 tests and steps before you ever get to see a provider or a counselor, because by the time you get there, you've lost your ability to be able to get there. And so we're trying to figure out ways around to try and help the behavioral health crisis in Alaska, realizing that it needs to also be money, but what other things can we do? I was glad to see the association come together in a very strong front to try and deal with that. I will turn it over to, one other thing to bring up, the budget. School bond debt reimbursement is fully funded. What is not fully funded in the governor's, and we all know this is part of a negotiation, is municipal assistance revenue sharing. And it's 3 years worth of funding. So it is fully funded. He's put the amount in to fully fund, but we haven't backfilled the 3rd year. So it's 60, 60, 60. We get that. Anchorage gets 4 million or 4.2, I think it is. But if we don't have the average running over 3 years, all the amounts are reduced by 1/3. That is traditionally to hold the chairman like Lyman Hoffman, Donnie Olson, and that Neil Foster, because their rural areas get the floor of $75,000 each and they really need it. So it's usually a political play to make sure that they have to put something in, but we are watching that very closely too to make sure that's fully funded. Heather, I don't know if you had anything else?
I don't. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I don't think I do, Wendy. I think you've covered it well. I think as the last item there, Wendy mentioned on the community revenue sharing or community assistance program is the technical term now, is because that fund wasn't capitalized last year, that does affect the payout formula for the following year. And I know that the Municipal League is going to be working on getting that restored this year, and to make sure that to try to ensure that the payments that do go out are the full amount for the different communities.
One thing that I will bring up, housing. I'm trying to work with AFHC, Brian Butcher and Ike in that, because there's areas, there was some leftover money that went to Nome, Kotzebue, Bethel, 5 million each for housing. It was leftover ARPA funds that they had to spend. They are going to capitalize that funding and try and get a low interest loan from AFHC to build more and use the income off that. We're trying to work with AFHC to figure out if there's a model for Anchorage. Even if Anchorage puts in, if you give us, can we capitalize that money and then use the revenue off that? We'll bond, but we're trying to figure out ways that we could bring to you to say, here's some options. Do any of these work? Just not always going in and saying we need general fund, trying to think of a creative way to come up with our homeless issue and housing. I will tell you there's a bunch of tax bills, and could go into them all, but I don't until they look like they're going to go.
Yeah, thank you very much for that overview. So I'll ask folks, if you want to get in the queue, just raise your hand. I'll look at my phone too. So I see Mr. Cross, Mr. Myers. Yeah, and go ahead, Mr. Cross.
And I'll have to find it. It just came on my radar. I saw that Dunbar is moving a bill that makes significant changes to the Alaska Landlord Tenant Act and short-term rentals. I'm kind of curious on what the thoughts are on that success, if that's something that showed up on your radar.
Yes, it is. And of course, the realtors are watching that one too.
Yes.
So Assemblyman Cross. So there is a lot of, because that's coming forth from the hotels, there is a lot of involvement in that. Representative Gray, I think, has it on the House side too. And there are, the realtors have come forth, they're probably the biggest associations, come forth and said, we like parts of it, there's parts of it we don't like. And that are the requirements on how many days you're considered a short-term rental, vacation rental. Like if contractors come to town and they need to rent for 30 days or 45 days, are they considered a short-term rental like a VRBO? There's issues in that bill that need to be worked out. I can tell you the realtors decided to stay away from making a real decision on it right now until they see what the final product looks like.
Yeah, there was another part of that required a 90-day notice
Yes.
to increase or adjust rents.
Yes.
And so I don't imagine they were a big fan of that either.
No, they weren't. There were probably 4 or 5 sections to it they weren't a big fan of. And they have a bill out that right now that says to dealing with assessments on the sale of your property. So they're focusing on that right now rather than getting everybody excited to see how that goes. But I won't be surprised to see that one move in the Senate, or at least start to come over in the Senate and start the discussion. There'll be a lot of VRBO. Oh, and it also says you can only have one VRBO in your name. That'll be real problematic for some people too. So it's a concept. I think eventually it'll be worked through and those issues will be worked out. I don't see it going this session.
Mr. Myers?
Thank you, Ms. Chamberlain, for being here. I have a question about Senator Elvie Gray Jackson's bill as well, dealing with rent controls and the amount you can charge for prepaid rent or security deposits. Have you been tracking that?
But I'm sure my partner Heather has. Heather, that one's going to go to you.
Thank you, Wendy. And I forgot to say in the beginning, good afternoon to everyone. And I wish I could have been there in person, but we're hunkered down in Juneau with all the snow. So I think on these bills, we will get you some more analysis and write-up on the particulars of each of the bills. But I think to your question, specifically really to the Landlord Tenant Act, I think those bills are, in our experience over the years, have taken a little bit more than a couple of months to get through a legislative body. And so I think, as Wendy indicated, they're new ideas, not new ideas, but they are, the conversations will just now start to begin around those. And so we'll be providing you with some more information on the specifics and the provisions and get that to you soon.
Okay, thank you, Heather.
I will tell you one thing. It used to be you could get a bill through in a session. Anymore, if it's one session, it's very, very difficult because finance gets so bogged up. Everything has to go to finance, and then they shut down for budgets and then negotiations on like the BSA and that. It's really tough now to get a bill through in one session, unless it's a priority bill.
sorry, another question, Wendy. What are the per eligible residents? What are the requirements for that, for the energy dividend?
Same as the PFD.
Okay,
Same, if you
Just
get a PFD, it'll
if you
be
get a
added.
PFD.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, it's just an energy dividend to go on your It'll be they're hoping to add it, so you'll see on your dividend check, the dividend and then the energy dividend.
perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. And also note to members, we haven't had a chance to go through all of the pre-files, but we are keeping a list of bills that we're tracking, as well as I know AML is tracking very closely. And so if there are ones that you think we should take a look at, please just let Jennifer and Claire know. I think mostly Jennifer, she's keeping that tracker. And then that way we can have it on the radar. So I do know there's a crop of them that we need to look at. Not all of them relate to the city, of course, but so I'll see if any other folks are in the queue. But in the meantime, I have a question actually about school bond debt reimbursement, and it's more a technical question. So is that reimbursement? Because I think I heard it's for debt before 2015, or and then does it also apply, or would it apply to for example, if this year's school bond passes, so future debt?
No, not right now, Heather. They have not changed that, have they? Anna McKinnon,
No, and I can jump in here.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So the moratorium is still in effect. So any of that debt that we're seeing, that debt service paid yearly or annually now is associated with that those prior issuances. For our bond this year, it would not apply, not only because the moratorium's in, but because they've suspended the application process through the department. So once that moratorium is lifted, then that process will begin again. And I'm told that there could be a sizable lag period there before it doesn't just go back into effect immediately, but you've got to have some time to get those applications through and approved and those kinds of things.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, because I know that helped the city offset some of the property tax burden a few years ago, such that it reduced our property tax. But just to be clear, that was for prior debt that was already taken on. Okay, other members have questions?
Right.
Oh, yeah, go ahead, Member Bronca.
So I know there was 5 days for vetoing the mayor's education veto. Can they keep working to change amount on the BSA in this 5 days, or is it like we're looking at just overriding and going with what was originally proposed? I mean, will they be wiggling back and forth in the 5 days, and then if we can't get anywhere, we can't override, or is it just not sure?
Well,
how
the
it works?
override's a joint session. So the House didn't have the votes to ask the Senate into joint session. So that override is done. Does it mean that they couldn't try and put something on the floor real quickly? They have been working on it through rules, but Senator Wielechowski and that told Heather and I the votes aren't there. So, yeah. And the Senate doesn't want to do it partly because they want that high number. They're like, no, if we do a compromise and put $400 BSA per student or whatever, people will say you funded it. No, we want to stand clear. We want the whole amount or nothing. Of course, the House would go for a compromise. So but yeah, no, the override's just the 5 days.
And
Yeah, and if I
okay.
might just jump in a little bit
Go ahead.
there, so specifically, as Wendy said, yes, they could still try to put together a veto override joint session. It's got to be done within the first 5 days of session. And as of yesterday, the votes were not there to move forward on a veto override, which only affects the current fiscal year's appropriation that was reduced by the governor. However, your second part of your question was, can they still continue to work this issue? And the answer is yes. There are multiple bills in from last year that propose different amounts of a BSA increase. And the House, as Wendy spoke to, is working on a compromise bill that would put some of the governor's funding priorities in there, dealing with charter schools, correspondence funding, the teacher recruitment and retention payments, and as well as a BSA increase. It is significantly lower than what the Senate passed last year, and or any bill represents to date. So they are trying to put together something to start those negotiations, but we expect this to be a session-long debate and really a battle to get to the end.
So I think at the end of the day, you're going to see the votes for the budget won't be there. That if they can't come up with something, then the budget won't go. And so that's just be part of it. And I don't think anybody wants to send out pink slips or in an election year or any of that. So it'll be an end game.
Yeah, go ahead, Member Braga.
The pension that was floating around last year, was it only for police and fire? Are we looking at teachers potentially, defined benefits again, or is that all gone? The looking for defined benefits for police, fire, I thought was
Yes.
working its way. Is that still alive at all? And is there any possibility of teachers being put in there as well?
I very much doubt it, but Heather, clarification on that one.
Absolutely. So yes, there are a couple of bills in. One, Representative Josephson has sponsored over the last few years, is still alive, and that one is just what you described. It deals with public safety employees. The Senate version, SB 88, sponsored by Senator Giesel, is still being worked on. It made it up to the Senate Finance Committee last year. She's been working, her and really a coalition of folks working to get that progressed this year. That encompasses all public employees. So it's teachers and sort of the balance of public employees and both state and municipal. So those are really kind of the two leading proposals out there right now.
And Heather, just a question so the members understand, what's the fiscal note on those? Could you just say
Well,
terrific?
that's part of the reason it did not move out of Senate Finance last year. When a bill of this topic before it can pass, they have to have an actuarial, professional actuarial report done on it. And we had 2 of them done last year. And I'm specifically talking about Senate Bill 88, which is all public employees and teachers. We had 2 done, and they sort of came out with differing conclusions on what the cost would be to the state and municipalities in going forward. So I think that's a lot of the work that we'll see presented in the next few weeks to try to make the case to move the bill forward.
Okay, and before we move to Mr. Rivera, I wanted to also ask for just a brief explanation of the supplemental budget. That's something I don't understand very well. In context of, we talked about overriding vetoes. Can you maybe just describe what the supplemental budget is, if there is one, and how, and if that's this current fiscal year, next year, what that looks like, and if there's going to be one?
So the supplemental budget is a budget that comes forth that has extra expenses for the current year that were not anticipated or appropriated in the budget for this year. So maybe there were fires, maybe there were public safety issues, maybe there was a landslide in Juneau, a school burnt down. All of those sort of things come into a supplemental, including extra operating. Maybe they need more Medicaid funds, unanticipated expenses. So good news, bad news. Usually they try and count that to get away with it on the current year's budget so that it isn't added into their current spend for next year, what they're looking at for next year. But it depends who the finance chairs are. What you're going to see here in the next, at the 30th day, you'll see the governor put out an amended budget, and there are things he didn't include in his budget right now that he wants included. So you'll see his amendments to the budget come out on day 30.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Rivera.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. So I am curious about any actions that the legislature may take on childcare. I know that the governor's childcare task force released a report in December, and then they have a second report coming out sometime soon. Is there anything in there that you think the legislature will be proactive on this session?
None that I can
When you
think
want
of,
me to-
Heather. Yes, go ahead and answer that. I was just trying to think of the bills out there. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So Representative Julie Colomb has a bill in that's been introduced last session that would change the requirements, the threshold for the daycare or childcare assistance program. And that one specifically deals with sort of that piece of the issue. As you said, sir, the report first came out, and now they're working on a second piece. It's our understanding that until that second report is issued and really delves into the long-term funding, that will be something that some people will want to hold off on, and some people will try to move forward with discussion. So it's really kind of comes down to, budget, what we have in revenue, and how much need is shown, and really the appetite for making another appropriation on that front. But yes, the work continues. There are a number of legislators working with the administration on different pieces of the challenge for childcare in Alaska.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and I mentioned that both because I am interested in it, but also, I don't know what it is about it, but I've just noticed there's a lot of bipartisan support for childcare. I've been going to several of the events that different organizations have hosted, and I've noticed representatives and senators from both sides of the aisle. So I don't know what they're doing that's getting that kind of bipartisan support, but hopefully we can emulate that for some of our housing and behavioral health and homelessness work. Thanks.
Yes, and I would just add to your comments that the state chamber has come out in support of initiatives on that front. Just purely from an employer perspective of saying we can't get people back into the workforce who don't have childcare available, and so there are these outside entities that have really come forward to also add their support and advocacy for a state solution.
Yeah, thanks very much. And I'll note too, there's the team working on the Proposition 14 implementation, which was the marijuana tax now dedicated to early child education. We'll have more information coming soon, but there are going to be some public meetings, and we're certainly looking at, or I should say our team is looking at the recommendations from the State Child Care Task Force. So different issue, but certainly of interest to the municipality, in part because we don't want to duplicate what others are doing. Okay, I think, are there any other questions? Not seeing any. Well, thank you so much, Wendy and Heather, for being here and for your work. I'm looking forward to working with you during session. And so I think we'll move on then to our next item.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
See you in Juneau.
Yeah, safe travels.
Thank you. Thank you, and see you soon in February.
Yeah, thank you. And that is a good segue to our next item. So just briefly, item C here, the Alaska Municipal League AML Winter Conference and Legislative Event. So I will kick off and then I'll hand it over to Claire. This is just a brief update, and I know we've been talking with some folks. So Alaska Municipal League has their winter conference down in Juneau, which is basically a legislative fly-in for local governments. So myself and Member Rivera will be there. It is February 20th through the 22nd is the actual conference. And then coinciding with that, we are working on organizing in Anchorage, hosting a legislative event for our, basically for our caucus. I believe others would be welcome to participate. Always good to build relationships with folks outside of Anchorage. So I will turn it to Claire, maybe just to briefly share the date and what we're planning, and then we know there's details to come.
Excellent. Thank you. As you said, you and Member Rivera, as well as Member Salt, are going to be going. And we had budgeted in the Assembly budget money for 3 members to go. But if anyone else wants to go, we'd love to have you join. And if you wanted to use your individual funds, the conference is usually really good. And it's fun to go have some meetings with legislators too. So hopefully, even though we won't be doing a luncheon, I think I'll ask those of you who are going if they're members you want to meet with, and then I can help set up those meetings. And then there'll be the dinner with the Anchorage caucus Tuesday evening. The conference is Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. You can take a flight leaving Anchorage pretty early Tuesday morning, and it gets into Juneau at 9 when the conference starts. And then the conference ends midday Thursday. So you could do some legislative visits that afternoon and take a flight back that evening. February 20th through the 22nd is the conference.
Yeah, and I'll just note too, I know, Open Meetings Act considerations are always important, but as I understand it, there is actually a carve out for local elected officials who are attending those kind of events like the conference. So certainly we don't have to be limited to 3. Obviously, we need to be mindful of that in general. And then if you would like to come, you can work with the clerk's office and legislative services to get your travel scheduled. Again, it would come out of your personal budget, but that is a totally allowed expense. And then just to note also, that is our official kind of meeting down there, or fly-in. But if there's opportunity, or you would like to go down another time, or there's a reason you'd like to be there at any point during session, that is also an opportunity. And then, of course, if you're doing official assembly business for that trip. So just to note, that is an option for everybody. So I would encourage that. Any other questions or comments on that? Okay. Yeah, and we'll be sharing more details about that soon, but just wanted to make folks know about the dates. Our last item under new business is the committee meeting schedule. This is another brief one. You have a handout, just a short piece of paper here. So we have scheduled our regular not weekly, monthly meetings through session, and you'll see that I actually scheduled through June. And the intent of that is I'm assuming that they're going to go past the April 15th timeframe. And because these are early in the month, other than today, the idea was to be able to capture that. And so we can have our kind of monthly discussion if there's anything that needs to come up with specific bills. And then I'll note that the June meeting is really the intent to do a debrief. So we'll know by that time, hopefully, unless they have a special session, we'll know what's passed or hasn't passed. And so we can have that last kind of wrap up. And then you'll see it says remaining meetings will be announced later in the year. I think we had a really successful legislative program drafting process. And of course, we can start that back in the fall to make sure that we're on track. But I think there's not a lot to do over the summer. And of course, all the legislators will be back. At least the incumbents will be running for office again. So there's not a lot of activity in that time period. So just to note, that's what we're looking at. And again, my goal is these are scheduled for an hour. If we don't need the hour, that's fine. But I want to make it really a time for members to bring, like Member Cross and Member Myers did, if you have bills that you'd like to talk about or you have questions about. So, and then again, if you have legislation you'd like us to track, please share that with staff, specifically Jennifer. So that is that. Any questions on the schedule? Okay. And then, so the last item, we just have our standing updates, and I'll note that we have them separated by federal, state, and local, but we don't need to, or I guess district and member priorities, we don't need to go through those sequentially, but I'll just open the time if there's any other comments or items you'd like to raise, questions.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm wondering if, and I see that Mr. Constant couldn't attend today, but do we have an update on the work that Senator Sullivan is doing with HUD on the formulas? Do we know how that's going? Okay.
Yeah,
That's
I
fine.
don't know.
Maybe next
about-
time we can
Yeah,
ask
but yeah, I
Constant.
think that's exactly the kind of thing that hopefully by the 7th we'll have an update. Okay, not seeing any other updates. Oh, again, go ahead, Claire.
I haven't heard anything on that one, but we did hear today that all three of the Alaska delegations signed on a letter to HUD supporting the municipality's application for that grant a while back that you all did a resolution for as well, I believe. And so that will be getting sent. I assume they're sending it. We should check and make sure someone's sending it to HUD. And then Jennifer is going to send that out to the assembly so you can all see it. She's taking charge of sending out past resolutions to the appropriate bodies. And so last week she sent the legislative program to the legislature. And if you pass any additional resolutions this coming up, she'll be sending those to the appropriate bodies.
Yeah, thank you. And again, that's another good reminder. If there is a bill that you feel strongly about that you believe we should take a position on, federal or state, whatever it looks like, it can go through this committee. We can certainly spend time talking about it, but feel free to also get that drafted and submitted, which I know has been the process. So I don't want to be the bottleneck for all things legislative, but I want to make sure this committee is a resource for folks. So, go ahead, Claire.
Especially as the priorities that went into the legislative program are in some cases broad, and you'll be getting more details. Then we can do resolutions to give the specifics, and then Jennifer and I can make sure the appropriate people in the legislature get those.
Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, any other items that folks want to discuss? Okay. And I would offer public audience participation, but I don't see anyone other than the folks we already know. So I think we can consider this meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone.